What up, Pittsburgh Steelers fans? Matty P with Shannon White for the Steelers Global Perspective. We are back for all our content this week. Shannon, my good mate, had a week off, deserved a week off. I think you were out celebrating one of your wedding anniversaries. So I hope that was a good time. You were well missed on the channel, and it's good to have you back to talk some Steelers football.
Well, thank you. I'm glad to be back. I had our 32nd wedding anniversary. We had a blessed time, but I was just so very thankful, and God is good, and I'm glad to be back with my buddy Matt and talk about some Steeler football.
I love it. I love it. Well, I want to get straight into it. It's a very interesting draft process every year. We're at a very interesting place in the draft, I guess date and time in the timeline that is the draft process. And I thought there'll be a lot of content that rolls us from us over the weekend. But I guess number one, I wanted to ask two things. And we'll go through one and I'll give you my opinion on it, and then we'll go through the other. What is your biggest hope for the Steelers draft and their draft plans this year? And secondly, what is your biggest fear about the Steelers draft plans this year? Let's go with the goodness before we get to the more heebie-jeebies, the yips of the Steelers draft. So yeah, what's your biggest hope? And I'll just share mine, and then we'll do what's the biggest fear.
Yeah, we've been talking for years now that back when Kevin Colbert was nearing the end, he was not up to speed with current roster building principles, and he did not have the flexibility or the willingness to trade up or back in the draft, to make trades prior to the draft to get where he wanted to be. He didn't have those connections. And he was so stagnant and stubborn about the draft capital, including future draft capital. But we now have Omar Khan and Andy Weidel and these new age ideas that we even seen last year, where they traded up in the first, then they traded back into the fourth because they'd lost that selection. You could trade future draft capital. Let's say the Steelers this year trade a couple of picks for next year to move up and get guys they really want that they're targeting. This draft class is very important. If Khan nails it, they could be nearing the end of their rebuild. So I would expect the Steelers to pick even later next year.
Well, and the other thing that is interesting about this year that I do keep probably harping on about to the boredom of our listeners in one way is that, and I said it early on, and I did a video, and people didn't necessarily click on that one because of the way I titled it, and I kicked myself after I did it. It was about 8 weeks ago. This draft is there'll be a little bit next year, but this is one of the last drafts, which is why it is so good in talent at so many positions. It's one of the last drafts that has the COVID effect with the eligible year, with a lot of players that are 5th or 6th year experience that usually would be 4th or 5th year. Or you've got guys that are considered like a junior or whatever at 2 or 3 years, but have actually only really played a year and a half kind of thing, so that they're fresh and their body, that kind of thing. Like the COVID eligibility, we saw it a lot last year, but this seems, I'll have to go back and when we look at who finally gets drafted, because obviously there'll be UDFAs. But on paper, this should be the draft that has the highest percentage of guys that have this COVID eligibility, and is why you've seen some really experienced starters in the mix here, right? So, and when I say the 5 or 6 years, obviously that includes the fact that they played that year during COVID. So, and you find that when I go through and I was looking at prospects for different positions recently, on one of the stats tools I used, there are all these guys that have this weird amount of games when you compare them to picks 2 or 3 years ago, like tackle or whatever, because they've had a season where they played 6 or 8 games. And the analysis is really hard on that as well. Like 6 or 8 games, you're like, well, they played well, but they don't have a good sample size. Anyway, my point being is that there's so many much better prospects in this draft. And it's why I've advocated for so long about if you were to trade picks from next year, I'm cool with having 4 or 5 picks next year and having more picks this year because I think there's better talent in this year's draft. And there's going to be on the sheer numbers that they've played more football.
Yeah, you have, as you say, the COVID effect. You have guys, it seems like they played 6 years of college football. And it really, and then you have guys that, when we've talked about the center position, experience matters for center position. And you have guys like Frazier, 4-year starter, most of it at center. You have guys like Cedric Van Pran, championship experience, most of it at center. You have a guy, Jackson Powers Johnson, who's basically more of a one-hit wonder and have injury concerns.
Yep.
Which, you have to take into consideration. You have Graham Barton, and everybody's infatuated with his athleticism, and it's one of his best calling cards. But I view him as a guard first because he is probably the highest rated guard in this draft. And at center, he had 6 starts as a freshman. Now, that means that he has not developed the rapport, the leadership, the communication that it takes to be the center. A center is a different animal. And everybody's like, and I've heard people that's colleagues of ours who are saying, well, the center shouldn't be a priority. That drives me crazy because priority, you're talking about a guy who touches the ball every play on offense. Every play, him and the quarterback touch the ball. He calls out the protections. He calls out the adjustments, the line shifts. He has to have the intelligence, the instincts, the IQ, not just the physical attributes.
Yeah.
There's so much more. And there's a trust factor that develops over time. Listen to Terry Bradshaw talk about Mike Webster. Listen to Peyton Manning talk about Jeff Saturday. Listen to guys who had that relationship with their center. People are downplaying the importance of the center. Now, I agree. I do not want them to reach in the first round for a center. But the second round on is prime candidate territory to get your next legacy center. So my thing is, I hope this draft, my great hope, is that Khan is able to, with him and Waddle's connections around the league, that they can get people to pick up the phone, people who call their phone, to where they have that opportunity. Now, moving up, there's only one guy I would move up for, and that's Talisi Fuaga.
Good.
I love him. I think he's a general. The only way I trade up in this draft is if it's a generational guy. Now, I've heard people talk about the wide receivers. Steelers do need one, but this is a very deep class, and they have a lot of needs. And
I'm just saying, if Rome Odunze is there at 8 or 9, you're silly to not try. That's all I'm going to say.
I mean, I think, is Odunze that much better than A.D. Mitchell?
Yes.
I in my opinion, I like Odunze, but he is not. If he had everything he's got plus breakaway speed, but
Quinn Ewers is a better quarterback than Michael Penix Jr. People can laugh at me for that, but it's true. So I mean,
I just think that Mitchell is also very young. He has room for growth.
He better grow. I don't think
he's at 20. I think he's available. He might go a little early, but I think he would be there.
No, I think he'll go later.
But when you have all the needs they have, I would rather they stick where they're at, unless it's for Fuaga.
Yep.
I
back the plan. I do back the plan.
I think tackle should be the first round. If you have to trade up a little, even give up one of the thirds to move up in that second to make sure you get your center. And then it's kind of open what they would do next. I mean, obviously, you would like to get one of the receivers that we've talked about. And there's some really good deep class of receivers.
Yeah.
But I'm hoping that they could trade back a little bit, pick up extra picks. I'd like to see more picks, not less picks.
Yep.
And then there's even some guys that's going to be 4th, 5th round that is going to be, because, as you said, because of their experience, the COVID, that in a lot of years would be 2nd and 3rd round, they're going to fall into 4th and 5th round. So that's why you want them extra picks now. And if you trade some capital for next year, so be it. Because I expect the Steelers to pick later next year, and they'll be farther along in their rebuild. And next year it'll be more like we need to focus on this position and that position, just a couple, maybe 3 positions. This year they got really 5 needs going into this draft.
Easily.
So that's why they need more picks. So, but I'm really encouraged that I think Kahn and Waddle, that is their mindset. They have connections. They're willing to pick up the phone and they're willing to listen to offers from other teams. And I think it's a good possibility that we will see more activity than we're used to this draft, the next 3 days of that draft.
I like it. My biggest hope is that the Steelers walk away from the first 3 rounds with 3 blokes that they still want to. They got 4 picks right now in the top 100. They walk away with at least 3 blokes, however many picks they have, but they walk away with 3 blokes that they actually want to give a second contract to by the end of it, because that's not something we can really say about the last 4 or 5 years worth of draft picks. There's not a lot of players that have earned a second contract or that haven't been traded away. So particularly the second and the third round. The first round, I mean, right now I'm having an argument on a social media platform about why Jackson Powers-Johnson is not God's gift to the earth at center that, everyone keeps making him out to be, less than half the snaps of any other center prospect, all the rest of it. And everyone's going off this massive evaluation, this 1-year wonder. I keep saying to people, Graham Barton has played half the snaps at center almost that JPJ has had. Are you kidding me?
It's 6 games.
No, but I'm just saying it's not.
I know, but I mean it's 6 games. That shows you that it was kind of a 1-year wonder thing.
Yeah,
with Jackson
totally.
Powers-Johnson.
And Jackson Powers-Johnson has had 9 penalties last year. The worst center in college football had 12, but there are a lot of people sitting there at 9, right? Frazier, I think, had 4. Barton didn't play center as much there. Matt Lee had a lot less than that. I think Matt Lee had 6 or 7. Anyway, my point being is that there are a lot of people that are drafted in round 1, and JPJ will go somewhere in round 1. Everyone will be like, "See, we told you he's worthy of a first-round draft pick." There are a lot of first-round draft picks that fail. There are a lot more second and third round picks that work out. And the problem with this Steelers organization over the last decade or so is the second and the third round haven't. And I know people can talk about Juju does really well and Pickens does really well. Did any of those guys yes, Juju earned an extra a small year contract, but who have we signed in the second round that has had a multi-year contract? Deontay's won a few. Anyway, my point being is that the second and the third round, if you go back and look at the statistics, particularly over the last decade, the teams that make the playoffs year in, year out, or the teams that have deep playoff runs a couple of years in a row, like the Rams and the Ravens at times, there are other teams in this list, in this bucket as well. The reason they got there is their second and their third round pick. And actually, I did a show back on when I was with BTSC with you and Steel Curtain Network, where I talked about this, and I actually went through it. And the second and the third round is actually more of an indication of whether you are going to make an AFC or NFC championship game or a Super Bowl. That is more indicative of that than who you draft in the first round.
I would also include the 4th round.
Yeah. It's those middle rounds, but particularly these second and third rounds. And so, as I say, as long as they can walk away with 3 blokes they want to give a second contract to, that's a win for me. And I know that's a very long term, very far out, that there are traits in draft picks that you look at and both on and off the field, and that's got to define that evaluation. All right, let's move on to the biggest fear. What's your biggest fear about the Steelers draft plans?
I guess my biggest fear is that the Steelers are unable to, which, again, I've already said I don't think this will be the case, but that people are going to have the same thoughts that we all have had forever, and that this is a deep draft and you can sit where you are and have a talented guy come to you, and everybody just not be willing to make deals and to listen. And then, as you say, I think if you take, and I'm saying this, I understand, Zach Frazier is my favorite player. I ain't saying he's the best player, but he's my favorite target for the Steelers. But I want him in the second round. I have a second round grade on him. I have a second round grade on Jackson Powers Johnson as well.
Same.
One of the reasons is, if people have been paying attention this week, he's had multiple concussions. He's had multiple injuries. I told you back when we started talking about the center prospects, he's top heavy, and he does not have a physique that lends itself to long-term health and longevity in the NFL. So my point is, if they sit there at 20 and then they say, kind of like when they picked Artie Burns, we got to have a center. We might not get who we want in the second round, and they reach for Powers Johnson or even Frazier in the first round, I will not be happy. I was not happy when the Steelers selected Joey Porter Jr. at 32 last year. And here's why. I wanted Joey Porter Jr., but I thought they could trade from 32. I thought there was going to be great value there and a lot of interest from other teams. And I thought they could trade that, move to like 34, 35. Yeah. And hopefully still get him, but pick up, truly benefit from what turned out to be a very unique experience, to actually having the last pick of the first round.
And I literally said, and I completely agree with you, and I'm not just like on the bandwagon. I said that I kept saying that at the end of day one, don't go and do that. Like, trade back just 2 spots, even if you get a 6th or something.
When do you get that opportunity?
Yeah.
It's like, for me, if you have the first pick of the whole draft and you have a solid top 5 and somebody wants to move up to take that, unless it's a guy that you just got to have, you can strengthen your team much more. And you obviously need it if you're picking the number 1 overall. I say you trade back and get, multiple guys that's going to help you. Look at the Houston Texans. It was a complete flip in 1 year.
Yeah.
They got Stroud, but they also got these other guys, Nico Collins and all these guys, Anderson, and now they're a threat. You need talented players, not one player.
Yeah.
So I just see that value. So we did the round table right after Joey Porter. I got to be on the round table for the second round pick, and everybody's like, "You ain't kind of unhappy," and I was just like, "Well, I thought they could get more out of the pick." It had nothing to do with Joey Porter Jr.
Yeah,
it had to do with building and helping this Steeler team, because you've seen what was coming. Now you're in a situation in the middle of this rebuild, and you have all these needs, and you don't have enough picks.
Yeah.
So I was hoping some of that would have been answered last year, and it was kind of to a point, but you knew they was going to be in this situation this year. But that's my fear, that the Steelers will reach, kind of be a little bit of a knee-jerk desperation selection. And that my other fear is that, it's kind of a little bit of dumb luck. You need good fortune. You need the draft board to fall to you.
Yep.
And not like, I think it was last year, 3 guys that I wanted the Steelers to have a chance at were picked either right before them or 2 picks before them.
Yeah.
And that kind of, that makes it rough. And everybody's like, well, we got Darnell Washington. Well, why did Washington fall? There's been reports this week about his knees.
I almost did a video
that his career is going to be shorter, and that's why he fell. Now, the Steelers are, you don't know how long a guy has, and the Steelers are like, he's too good not to take, and they got great value where they got him. But what I'm saying is they was 3 rounds that their guy just got taken off the board before they had that chance. And that's the problem with picking in the middle.
Yeah.
When you pick at 20, it almost always happens that way. That's a terrible place to pick. And the Steelers are perpetually stuck there because they're always mediocre. Just good enough to miss the playoffs or barely get in, but they're not getting better or worse. They're stuck there.
Yeah.
So that's why this draft's so important. Build and get this rebuild, accelerate it. And one way they can do that is to have maneuverability and flexibility within the draft, including trading some of next year's capital to get the targets you want this year.
Yeah, I like it. I like it. My biggest fear, I worry that we are going to prioritize D-line over linebacker. And I actually think they're a lot more of an equal need than what a lot of people do. And I worry because I feel like what they need, I know they're worried about Cam and is this his last year, is it not? But they can address that next year even with a big free agent. Like the D tackles are one of the positions where you can spend a lot of money in free agency and often you get a decent return on your investment. It's a lot less luck, as you just said. I want a young, cheap linebacker in round 3 or 4, and people will go, they've got 4 or 5 other needs. If there's not any person that can convince me on this earth that they do not need a linebacker as a rookie linebacker that's actually got the potential to be, it doesn't have to be number 1 because Patrick Queen's going to be the number 1 for the next 3 or 4 years if everything goes well.
Yeah.
But they need someone that can be a really solid number 2. And Landon Roberts has got 1 or 2 years left playing high snaps the way Steelers play football with his age. Longer if you can manage his snaps. Cole Holcomb, I'm hoping he comes back from injury and it's all hunky-dory, but it might not be, right? And if it's not,
it's a risk. It's a risk.
And if it's not, then he's probably the league's best number 3, right? Like easily the league's best number 3. But why you wouldn't want to get a guy, whether it's a Junior Colson, Jay Ford, there's a few different players, and I noticed for listening out there, I haven't picked Peyton Wilson, or I haven't picked Cooper, or I haven't picked, there are a couple of other guys. I haven't picked Trotter or whatever, because I think those guys will be taken quickly. But there are some specific guys. I mean, Colson's my top linebacker. There are some specific guys because, and I know Peyton Wilson might be the most talented linebacker on the list. With injury history, I want a sure pick in the 3rd round at linebacker that. And no one's a sure pick, but I want someone that has the best of everything that they can put in there and they can groom and develop. Because I do think they can develop a linebacker. But they need to develop a linebacker and not stop having to either spend high draft capital on them or spend $15 million a year to get the bloke. They need a guy in the center that's prepared to put a hit on, that's prepared to learn how to, if he's going to learn how to play coverage, but get younger and cheaper at that position. Because I feel like this is a problem that is only getting worse. And you talk about kicking the can down the road. Man, have they kicked this can down the road? I mean, everyone talks about, I got very cranky on a global perspective we did 2 or 3 months ago because everyone talked about, since the Shazier injury, I'm like, Shazier, that's 2017. That's 6 seasons ago.
Yeah.
And you still got this problem. I know you tried to address it with Devin Bush, but we took him too high. If you wanted to address it properly, and if Shazier was that important as everyone made out, it was the only missing piece, even though the secondary was crap that year as well, then you should have drafted up and got Devin White, right? And yes, history proves that Devin White can get extra contract with Tampa. They only have a certain number of players that can play. I don't think they utilized Devin White like the Steelers could have used Devin White. Like there's a lot of if, whats, or buts. I'm just saying, use a middle round pick, get a guy in a year where linebackers are not considered 1st or 2nd round picks, right? Maybe, Peyton Wilson probably goes the back end of the 2nd now that I've said that. But go get Junior Colson in the 3rd, or go get a Jay Ford, or get a Trice Knight. There are a couple of other players in that mix as well. They're just the ones I plucked out of my brain.
I think Trotter will be 3rd. Late 3rd.
I don't worry about Trotter's size.
Colson might go before Trotter.
He should.
Yeah, I think he might. Yeah.
But Colson at Michigan Like, I just think if you trade up in the third, right? If you use a third and you use a next year's fifth, or, I know that there's rules about next year's fourth because of the Pickett trade and all the rest of it, but like, use something and go get Colson in early on the third, or use a pick next year, like a third and then a fifth, the fifth you got this year or whatever, or they don't fifth, the sixth, sorry. And find a way to get Colson at the top of the third. You may not have to draft the linebacker again in the first 6 rounds for the next 4 years, at least 3 years, maybe 4 years. Big tick on a big problem for the Steelers.
Yeah, but as you say, they've got Patrick Queen now, and if you could put a young stud next to him, you don't have to start immediately, as we know, but can develop into that. Then you're set, and like you said, you won't have to focus a high pick on it for a while.
Yeah, and I mean the Steelers know how to get enough out of a D tackle, like to. Yeah, I just think that's what they got to do. But anyway, that is going to wrap up this episode of Biggest Hopes, Biggest Fears of the Steelers draft plans. Stay tuned for more content from us out of the weekend. As always, go Steelers.